We were founded by Chinese Americans back in 2000 to tell the truth about communist China. That was the origin of Epoch Times in the first place. Yeah.
Wow.
As of 2006, we understood this. There's this organ industry in China where they're using the prisoners of conscience. They're using the Falun Gong for basically as unwilling organ donors. One of the pieces of evidence that they found in 2006 was that there are actually newspapers in America that are advertising, I can get you a new heart in 2 weeks. There's a living guy who's missing part of his liver and part of his lung, has a 14-inch gash in his side.
Well, I appreciate you coming on so last minute.
Oh, I love being here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So do you wouldn't mind just kind of give me the overview of how did you get involved with Epoch and your story?
I'll tell you, I have a funny line about that now.
Okay.
We're for freedom of speech, right?
Yes.
And we're for freedom of conscience and belief. We're also for freedom of pronunciation.
That's great.
Yeah, so
I'm welcome. Even I'm welcome because I'm going to butcher everything today.
I do Epoch. Yeah, so my name is pronounced Jan Jekielek. That's the best
Jan Jekielek.
English way to say it. In Poland, it's a little bit different, but even Poles misspell it. So it's a very unusual name. I'm senior editor at the Epoch Times. I've been with them 19 years.
Wow.
I've seen a lot of change over those years. And of course, we were founded by Chinese Americans back in 2000 to tell the truth about communist China. That was the origin of Epoch Times in the first place. Yeah.
Wow. And so where has it been getting to now? So you have to forgive me because I don't know really the history of Epoch.
Oh, sure.
Where you guys started and then where you guys are at now and then where you're trying to get to. So is there anything throughout the journey that has been pivotal moments in Epoch Times that has gotten you guys to where you're at today?
Well, there's many pivotal moments. Let me include one that's just jumping to my mind. Well, first of all, we were actually founded in Atlanta.
Wow.
That's where some of our founders had been through the student movement in '89. They survived the Tiananmen Square massacre, or they were in other cities where the movement was alive. They got out during the '90s and ended up in America, and some of them ended up at Georgia Tech. And that's actually when in 1999, when the Chinese Communist Party turned against the Falun Gong. Do you know the background of that?
No, sir.
So Falun Gong fits broadly into what you would call a Qigong. And Qigong are ancient Chinese practices that, some people might see Tai Chi being practiced. They know what that looks like. So for someone looking from the outside, it would be these slow motion exercises. There's more to it. It's always kind of mind, body, spirit together. So in Falun Gong, you're living by truth, compassion, and forbearance. And you kind of believe that there's a health benefit from that too, right? But there's also like a personal equanimity, mind, and spiritual benefit from that. And then there's these exercises which help with doing that.
Okay.
In the 90s, the regime opened up the opportunity for people to do these ancient practices, but they called them Qigong, which was kind of traditionally they had kind of more religious sounding names and so forth. Now it became this kind of secular thing. Falun Gong was by far the most popular. And by the end of the 90s, the regime itself estimated 70 to 100 million Falun Gong practitioners across China.
Wow.
Bigger than the Communist Party of China.
Wow.
And the thing you have to understand is that Chinese Communist Party, like any Communist Party, is very jealous and very hierarchical, like extremely. Like the guy at the top, in those years, it was Jiang Zemin was his name.
Okay.
Now it's Xi Jinping. Essentially, everything goes down and through society from them, and everyone's trying to implement those dictates at every level. Falun Gong didn't fit into this at all. There's no, basically there's no exact leadership. There's teachings. People that want to practice it will follow them, but there isn't a hierarchy. Okay, there isn't money collection. I can't even, if I think you're a great Falun Gong practitioner, I'm not allowed, at least the way I understand, I'm not allowed to copy you. And how you're doing things. I have to find my own way to do it. It's very personal.
Okay.
Right? The regime could not understand this. This was sort of a completely different way of looking at the world.
It's just the antithesis of who they were. Right.
I think so. And I think that was part of the problem, right? And so partially we have this jealous dictator that wanted to have the sort of, I guess cultural strength that Li Hongzhi, who was the founder of Falun Gong, could never get because he was a dictator.
Okay.
And on the other hand, they sort of imagined, we'll eradicate it. That's in the words of the dictator, but they imagined they could do it in a few weeks, but they didn't understand that people were very self-directed in doing this. And so this massive persecution began. They set this unwritten policy. All Falun Gong deaths, there were millions of people that were put into the labor camps and prisons. All Falun Gong deaths are going to be considered suicide. In other words, you can work on these people to re-educate them by whatever means. And if they die along the way, well,
we're going to market as suicide.
That's fine, right?
And this was in the 90s, you were saying?
This is 1999. That's when this persecution is launched. And, our founders actually in America, they're like, hey, First Amendment here, we can actually tell the truth now. We were behind those lines in 1989, but in America today,
this was genocide.
It turned into genocide. Exactly.
Wow.
I believe that. So Bob Destro, who was in Trump 45, he was the Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Rights, and Labor.
Sure.
Okay. He agrees. I had him on the show, my show, American Thought Leaders, a few years ago. And he talked about that. He said, we all agree that what's happening in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs is genocide. What is genocide? It's the wholesale destruction of a group, in whole or in part, in an attempt to basically get rid of these people.
Yeah.
You can do that culturally. You can do that just by killing a ton of people. There's all sorts of ways. So by my estimation, and Bob agreed with me on this when I suggested it to him, the Uyghurs are being genocided. The Tibetans are being genocided, and you don't hear about them a lot. And I'll mention why I think that is in a moment. And the Falun Gong are being genocided. I believe that. I believe it would fit into that rubric. We could just, but the point is, it's really bad. It's what you call crimes against humanity.
Yes.
It's like extreme persecution, which continues to this day.
And then and then Epoch was founded like in the late 90s, early 2000s at that point
Correct.
to tell that story?
To tell that story in Chinese language for Chinese Americans. But it became really clear very quickly that Americans needed this. Why? Because it was Kissinger doctrine time. Basically, what you were supposed to believe was that if you pump enough money into China and everybody goes there and all industry goes there and we never make them, sort of lose face or something like that, it'll become a democracy. That was the kind of weird idea, right? 2009, Tom Friedman, New York Times, he's writing op-eds that say we should adopt governance practices from China, right? Meanwhile, for me, as of 2006, we understood there's this organ industry in China where they're using the prisoners of conscience, they're using the Falun Gong for basically as unwilling organ donors as part of, like you said, kind of genocidal or quasi-genocidal behavior. Why?
Using for research or like just parts?
No, because so one of the pieces of evidence that they found in 2006 was that there are actually newspapers in America that are advertising, I can get you a new heart in 2 weeks. How can that? So you wanted the first legislation that was created against this. This was in Israel. Head of the Israeli Transplant Association, Yaakov Levi, amazing man. He has a patient that says, hey, listen, I can't wait 2 years for my heart transplant, but they're offering me one in 2 weeks in China. And I've got the date scheduled. And Yaakov says, that's impossible. Like if it's scheduled, he's thinking, he didn't say this, I think, but he's thinking to himself, if it's scheduled, it means someone's being killed for it. How could I know when someone's going to die to do the operation, right? Because someone has to be brain dead and body alive. But the guy goes and gets it done and comes back and says, here I am with my heart transplant. And then Yaakov spends a number of years enacting the first legislation to basically say, we're not going to pay money for these. Israel's not going to pay money for these transplants. But to this day, there's a ton of people who still don't believe or don't want to believe in the reality of this. And there's been a whole China tribunal back in 2020 that was convened to look at all the information. And they say, absolutely, this is happening. And now there's even a survivor. Okay, there's a survivor. And this is against all odds. My father-in-law was a Holocaust survivor. Okay.
Yeah. Wow.
This survivor, he's kind of like a Holocaust survivor in some ways, in that every step, there's these multiple points in their lives where it was almost certain death. If you had taken a slightly different decision at that moment, you would have been on the train that everybody was eliminated or something, right? Well, this guy has a life a bit like that. And in the end, there's a living guy who's missing part of his liver and part of his lung, has a 14-inch gash in his side, and he's around to tell the tale. And that guy, Bob Destro, that I mentioned earlier, actually rescued him to America. And here's the rub. They absolutely never want anyone to believe this or accept it. Right. And there's been all sorts of organizations, unfortunately, I hate to say this, have essentially been running cover for them, wittingly or unwittingly. Okay. And now they have this huge push, right? They've decided Epoch Times has become an incredibly influential media, number 4 in terms of paid subscribers in America. We have this organ harvesting survivor that's really exposing them in crazy ways. There's been more media on it in the last 6 months than the last 18 years by my measure. That was one of the issue I've been following.
Wow.
But then there's also the Shen Yun show, right? I don't know, you're familiar with Shen Yun?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, incredible. So you know what Shen Yun is. 1 million audience a year. They hate that. It shows how beautiful and wondrous traditional Chinese culture was, and that all goodness in China doesn't come from communism. In fact, yes, communism was the destroyer. The interesting
part of that show, when I was watching it, you just had this beautiful show, then all of a sudden it turned political, and it was just this stark, like, whoa, like this is this is telling a very stark story. And I saw it like 3 or 4 years ago with my wife. It was beautiful.
What was the scene that you saw
Man, it was in Detroit when we saw it, and it was just a lot of red. I remember a lot of red and some sort of like stomping down of people.
In Shenyun, there's typically 1 or 2 of the 20 or 25 different elements that go into the show. I guess kind of vignettes you could call them, that will talk about the cruelty of the Chinese regime to traditional culture, and it's sort of being antithetical to traditional culture, and it's manifested in different forms over the years. Yeah,
I just remember that show just being gorgeous, like the colors and the dancing, just absolutely gorgeous. But anyway, so back to Epoch, because this news organization was formed as a direct result of the communist government killing people because they weren't lining up with their versions of belief. Right?
And the second part was pushing the narrative that this was good and just to do. You see, like this, and a lot of American media were just like, oh, I guess what we're hearing from these, government representatives, I guess it must be true.
Man.
Right? I mean, we had such a naive view.
Sure.
The Chinese communists, they call us in their own literature barbarians, and just kind of a weird,
it's just propaganda. It's just propaganda. Correct. So where is the Epoch Times in 2024? Are you guys more of a overall news organization? So if people can come find you, you're going to try to give your unbiased stories of just all current events, or is it still mainly China focused?
No, so this is actually, so you asked me actually early on, tell me about your development, right? So yes. So it started out for Chinese in Chinese. Very quickly, it was English about China. And then a few years after that, it was already something much broader. And because there was this thirst, we realized we didn't fully grasp this, I think, at the beginning, but there was this thirst for truth-seeking media.
Yes.
Media has been in this process, and legacy, what I call legacy media, of moving away from what I call truth-seeking to narrative enforcement. There is the correct narrative, and we will enforce that. And if you don't agree, we're going to slander you and attack you. We've been hit multiple times by legacy media.
Yes.
But if I might add, most of those media also have financial interests with China. So, I believe that there's this huge incentive because the regime is so committed. Now we know at the state minister security level to destroying us and anything connected with Falun Gong in any way, right? That I think a number of these media have become, they think they're doing it, their narrative enforcement for the benefit of Americans or something, maybe.
Yeah, whatever
they're
they
really
say.
Unwitting tools of the Chinese regime against American interests. That's how I view it.
Wow. Last question, and then I know you have a million things to do today, so I don't want to take up, because we could talk for an hour.
I'm enjoying myself immensely here. Thank you. You ask good questions, by the way.
Thank you very much. We're going to clip that to send that to my wife.
Okay.
No, I was kidding. So how can people support you guys with your mission? And actually I want to ask one follow-up before that. So media survives on clicks. And sometimes the plain truth isn't as catchy as a spun story that twists the media to get more clicks and whatever. So how have you guys, as a free speech news organization, been able to balance, we need to get viewers, we need catchy titles, we need catchy this, but also still trying to stay true to the truth?
It's incredibly difficult. I think staying true to the truth is not that hard if you're deeply committed to it, which we are. And I think, as I said, that first Falun Gong principle, I think that's influenced us substantially from the beginning. So we're very mission oriented. We're actually, here's a fact for you, okay? We are 95% funded by individual paid subscribers. Wow. Okay?
Wow.
So there's a lot of media get funding in different ways, maybe larger donors. We do have maybe 3% larger donors, another 2% advertising. But I think that speaks to our independence, right?
And our advertisers advertisers not wanting to advertise because of the content and talking against China and things like that. Have you guys found that to be a struggle?
You've asked me a bunch of different questions that I could spend an hour on each of them.
Yeah, I know.
But I'm trying to think what I should answer first. Okay, so in answer to your first question, the nature of media today, with social media being so dominant, pushes people into silos. And it's become more of a thing where people pay by what validates their pre-existing views as opposed to just being informed about something new.
Interesting.
Right?
Yes.
And that makes it, and I could again explain this, is an amazing scholar at Manhattan Institute, Andre Meir, who talks about this, explains this really well. I've come to believe his view, but he kind of believes that it's inevitable and that we have no hope to not do it that way, but I actually have to disagree because our whole purpose is to be able to tell the truth, not just to one group of people who already understand, for example, the terrible things the Communist Party is about of China or anything else, right? We actually have to be able to reach those, let's say, the 10 million people that voted for Trump that are Democrats, for example, and beyond that, right? So, because the reason I say this is that we've often been called like a pro-Trump media or something like that. Those are a lot of the hit pieces.
Of course.
But
right.
why? Because we covered Russiagate, honestly, because it was ridiculous from the beginning. We called it Spygate back in the day, right? But now it's called Russiagate. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous story on its face. It was fake. I mean, the whole entirety of it was fake.
If you dare go against them, it's slander campaign on your way.
Exactly. But so actually, this is and what happens is your marketing team,
your
marketing team tells you, what do they do? They promote what works, and what works tends to be the stuff which is, like I said, you said it well, right? A little bit more, sort of emotion-inducing, edgy. Exactly. So it's a tough gig, and that's our purpose. Our purpose is to find that path to be able to actually inform, not validate, right? Because we need to do the validating too at some level. I think that just happens, right? But if you're not informing about the new things that people don't already believe and they don't trust you to do that, how can you really be a media? Right. So, and I think we've done it better than most, to be fair. But it's a big challenge in this day and age. So that's the answer to one of the questions.
Yeah, I know. I did rapid fire.
You had another great question that now I'm spacing
I'm blanking on it too, honestly.
How can people support us?
Oh yeah.
So I don't know how it is now, because allegedly the Washington Post lost 200,000 paid subscribers after not endorsing Kamala Harris in the race, if you recall that.
Yes, I do.
I don't know where that number came from. I don't know if it's real. That might actually push us into third place among these media. But to be sure, we're number 4 among these major news media in effect, right?
Wow.
In these paid subscribers, you want to support us, subscribe. And it's honestly not a lot. If people say, "Oh, it's the cost of a cup of coffee a month or a week," it's really not a lot. And I think you'll find the most common thing people tell me, right, is I found all sorts of stuff that I haven't found anywhere else, right? Which is I'm glad, and it means that people are looking for discovery. I mean, our health section is second to none. We've been very good again on the facts around that through the whole pandemic and
well, you guys are just doing real journalism. You're doing what journalism should be.
100%.
And it's honest truth. There you go. You can put that on your website. Okay. There you go. But it's just honest truth. You're not spinning narratives, and you're just saying what you guys believe, and that's important. I mean, like, I don't know.
Based on evidence, though.
Right.
Based on evidence, not like.
This is what I think.
Yeah.
Are you guys connected with the people at Parler at all? Because when you're talking, so they're the free speech platform that's coming back. They're the original free speech. I
actually want to connect with them because we were actually very big on Parler when it was destroyed. I mean, you know what happened, right?
Yes, sir.
And we just sort of, after we tried for a while, but eventually there seemed to be no activity.
There wasn't, because they were shut down, and then they're just now, I'm actually about to go on their show in 25 minutes. I'm friends with all of them. I'll introduce you, actually.
Please, that'd be great.
But their mission is the same. I love companies like yours and Parler and what Elon's trying to do on X, of just this decentralization of propaganda media and allowing people to do real journalism without being afraid that their senior editor is going to be like, "Oh, you can't write that article because it doesn't fit in line." And what you guys are doing is just finding facts and speaking truth. And I appreciate this interview because I legitimately had no clue who you guys were. I didn't have time. We have about 40 interviews in 3 days that I'm prepping for.
Yeah.
And I'm pumped. I'm like, okay, we're checking you guys out now.
Well, and I'd love to hear, and we love to get constructive criticism. You know, I'm not such a huge fan of the slag, the random slander, but I'm a huge fan of real constructive criticism because that's the only way we're ever going to get better. Right?
Perfect.
So,
well, Jan, thank you for coming on the show, guys. Check out the Epoch Times. Go subscribe if you would like to support.
TheEpochTimes.com. TheEpochTimes.com. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, brother. Thank you for coming to the show. Guys, support the Epoch Times. Subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, man.